The water heater had been making that grinding noise for 3 days when I finally crawled into the basement at midnight to fix it. 22 years as a mechanical engineer, and I still got stuck with the household repairs while my lawyer wife Grace slept peacefully upstairs. The irony wasn't lost on me. I designed heating systems for commercial buildings, but here I was, wrench in hand, fixing our ancient ream like some weekend warrior. That's when I heard Sophie's voice drifting through the thin basement ceiling. My 19-year-old stepdaughter was on the phone again, probably with one of her college friends, gossiping about whatever drama filled her social media-obsessed world. "Mom's totally buying it," Sophie whispered, but basement acoustics made every word crystal clear. "She thinks Dad's been stealing from her purse and getting weird with me. I mean, the guy's pathetic, but he's not a creep. Still, Mom's gonna throw him out tomorrow morning. I bet he cries like a baby." My wrench slipped, clanging against the water heater. I froze, listening. "No, seriously, it was so easy," Sophie continued. "Mom's been paranoid ever since she made partner at the firm. All I had to do was plant some seeds about Dad acting strange, maybe touching me inappropriately during those awkward stepdad hugs. She ate it up, probably because she's been screwing around with Ethan anyway." Ethan, her law partner. The guy who'd been coming to our house for work dinners twice a week for the past 6 months. The best part? I already sold most of his baseball card collection. That vintage Mickey Mantle rookie card alone got me $3,000. Mom thinks he's been selling his own stuff to fund some secret gambling problem. She's so smart in court, but so stupid at home. I sat there in the dark basement, surrounded by 20 years of accumulated junk, listening to my stepdaughter orchestrate my destruction with the casual cruelty of someone ordering coffee. The water heater gurgled, mocking me with its mechanical laughter. "Trust me, by this time tomorrow, he'll be sleeping in his car," Sophie giggled. "Mom already emptied their joint savings account. She moved it to some account he can't access. She thinks she's protecting their assets from his gambling debts. It's actually kind of brilliant how this all worked out." The conversation shifted to some college party, but I'd heard enough. I climbed the basement stairs slowly, each step feeling like a march to my own execution. 22 years of marriage, 15 years of raising Sophie as my own daughter, and this was how it ended, with lies, theft, and betrayal. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my home office, staring at the empty spaces where my most valuable baseball cards used to be displayed. The 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle, the 1909 T206 Honus Wagner reprint that still cost me $4,000, the complete 1975 Topps set I'd been collecting since I was 12. All gone. Grace found me there at 7 in the morning, already dressed in her power suit, coffee in hand, looking like she was about to deliver a closing argument. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cold and professional. This was Attorney Grace, not Wife Grace. I hadn't seen Wife Grace in months. "I'm listening." She sat across from my desk, the same desk where we used to pay bills together, plan vacations, discuss Sophie's college applications. Now it felt like a courtroom. "I know what you've been doing," she said. "The stealing, the inappropriate behavior toward Sophie, the gambling. I've been patient, hoping you'd get help, but I can't enable this anymore." "Sophie told you I've been inappropriate with her?" "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. She's been scared to tell me, but yesterday she finally broke down. The way you've been looking at her, the comments about her clothes, trying to hug her when I'm not around, it's disgusting." I stared at my wife of 22 years. We'd met when she was a struggling law student, and I was a junior engineer at Morrison Industries. I'd supported her through law school, celebrated every promotion, every victory in court. I'd walked Sophie down the aisle at her high school graduation when her biological father couldn't be bothered to show up. "And you believe her? Sophie has no reason to lie. Plus, there's the money missing from my purse, your baseball cards disappearing, our savings account being drained. You're obviously funding something, and it's not household expenses." Have you checked our joint account lately? Grace's composure cracked slightly. I moved that money to protect it. You've been acting erratic, and I won't let you gamble away our future. So you've already decided I'm guilty. Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The evidence speaks for itself. She slid a manila envelope across the desk. I'm filing for separation. You need to be out of the house by tonight. I've arranged for you to stay at the Riverside Motel until you figure out your next move. I opened the envelope. Legal documents, prepared with the same meticulous attention to detail Grace brought to all her cases. Temporary restraining order, asset protection, custody arrangements for Sophie, even though she was legally an adult. Grace had thought of everything. 22 years, I said. Don't make this about us. This is about protecting Sophie and protecting myself from whatever spiral you're in. Get help, get clean, and maybe we can discuss reconciliation. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Your boss called yesterday. Apparently, there's been some kind of complaint filed with HR. Something about inappropriate conduct with female employees. You might want to call him. After she left, I sat there holding the separation papers, trying to process the scope of what Sophie had orchestrated. She hadn't just destroyed my marriage. She'd torpedoed my career, stolen my possessions, and painted me as some kind of predator. All while I'd been working 60-hour weeks to pay for her college tuition. My phone buzzed. Text message from my boss, Ed Morrison. Need to see you first thing Monday. HR situation requires immediate attention. Don't discuss with anyone. I laughed then, sitting alone in my office, surrounded by the remnants of my life. Not a happy laugh. The kind of laugh you hear in courtrooms when defendants realize just how thoroughly they've been set up. Sophie appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, holding a bowl of cereal. She looked so young, so innocent. If I hadn't heard her confession the night before, I might have felt sorry for disrupting her morning routine. Morning, Dad, she said sweetly. Mom told me you guys are taking a break. That's probably for the best, right? You've seemed really stressed lately. Have I? Oh yeah, like really tense and weird. Mom's been worried about you. She took a bite of cereal, studying my face. Are you okay? You look kind of pale. This was masterful. Even knowing what I knew, watching her perform concern and innocence, I had to admire the skill. She'd learned from the best. Her mother could convince a jury that black was white if the case required it. I'm fine, Sophie. Just processing some changes. Well, if you need anything, you know you can talk to me, right? I mean, I know we've had some awkward moments lately, but I still care about you. Awkward moments. She was already laying groundwork for her next performance, probably for Grace's benefit. I appreciate that. Good. Oh, and Dad? I hope you get help for your gambling thing. Mom says there are really good programs for that kind of addiction. She skipped away, humming some pop song, leaving me alone with my coffee and my separation papers. I had about 10 hours before Grace expected me to be gone. 10 hours to figure out how to respond to the most comprehensive character assassination I'd ever witnessed. I started by calling my old friend Nick Torino, who owned a boxing gym downtown. Nick was ex-police, the kind of guy who understood that sometimes good people got railroaded by circumstances and bad actors. Nick, it's Dave. I need a favor. What's up? Can I crash at the gym for a few days? Grace and I are separating and I need somewhere to think. Course, you okay? Not even close, but I will be. After I hung up, I packed a single suitcase with clothes and toiletries. Everything else, photo albums, books, my remaining collectibles, tools, 22 years of accumulated life, stayed behind. Grace would probably box it all up and donate it to charity, erasing any evidence that I'd ever lived in this house. But as I loaded my suitcase into my truck, I realized something that Sophie hadn't counted on in her perfect plan. I was an engineer. Engineers solve problems. We analyze systems, identify failure points, and design solutions. Sophie had just become my most interesting problem. Nick's gym occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in the old industrial district, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned factories. The neighborhood wasn't pretty, but it was honest. No pretense, no hidden agendas, just people trying to get by. After 3 days of living in Grace's suburban courthouse, the gym felt like sanctuary. "You look like garbage," Nick said, watching me set up a cot in his office. "When's the last time you slept?" "Sleep's overrated. I've been thinking." "Dangerous habit. What about?" I told him everything. Sophie's midnight confession, the stolen baseball cards, Grace's preemptive strikes against my finances and career. Nick listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or grunting his disapproval. "So your stepdaughter played your wife like a violin, and now you're homeless and probably unemployed." "That's the situation." "And you're planning what exactly? Revenge?" "I'm planning justice. There's a difference." Nick laughed, but not unkindly. "Dave, I spent 20 years as a cop. I've seen plenty of guys in your situation. The ones who go looking for justice usually end up in handcuffs. The ones who go looking for revenge end up in the morgue. Then what do you suggest? Get a lawyer. Fight this legally." "With what money? Grace froze our accounts, and I'm probably getting fired Monday morning. Meanwhile, Sophie's got a 3-week head start on her story, and she's very convincing." Nick studied my face, probably trying to determine if I was dangerous or just desperate. "You got proof of what she did?" "I heard her confess on the phone." "Hearsay. Wouldn't hold up in court, and you know it." He was right, of course. Engineers think in terms of evidence and documentation. I had neither. What I had was knowledge. I knew the truth, knew how the system had been rigged against me, knew who was responsible. In engineering terms, I had identified the problem. Now I needed to design a solution. Monday morning brought the conversation I'd been dreading. Ed Morrison had been my boss for 8 years, and we'd developed the kind of professional relationship built on mutual respect and shared engineering obsessions. He looked genuinely pained when I walked into his office. "Dave, sit down. This is unpleasant for both of us." "HR complaint?" "Anonymous tip came in Friday. Allegations of inappropriate conduct with female employees, creating a hostile work environment, possible substance abuse issues affecting your work performance." Ed slid a folder across his desk. "I've got to suspend you pending investigation. Company policy." I opened the folder. The allegations were vague but damaging. Comments about female colleagues' appearance, erratic behavior suggesting drug or alcohol problems, missing work time that couldn't be accounted for. None of it was true, but it was all plausible enough to require investigation. "Ed, you've worked with me for 8 years. Do any of these allegations sound like me?" "No, they don't. But I've also got to follow protocol. Take some time, get your personal situation sorted out, and we'll get through this investigation as quickly as possible." "Any chance I can see the complaint? Know who filed it?" "Anonymous. And even if it wasn't, you know I couldn't share that information." I shook hands with Ed and cleaned out my desk, watched by curious colleagues who'd probably heard rumors but didn't know details. By noon, I was unemployed, separated, and effectively homeless. Sophie's plan was working perfectly. That afternoon, I visited Linda Chen, a family attorney I'd met through Grace's legal connections. Linda specialized in representing men in divorce cases, and she had a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless. "Your wife moved fast," Linda said after reviewing Grace's separation papers. "Asset protection, restraining orders, character assassination through official channels. She's good. Can we fight it?" "We can try, but you're starting from a significant disadvantage. She controls the narrative, has physical custody of the house and property, and apparently has your stepdaughter as a witness to inappropriate behavior." "Sophie's lying." "I believe you, but proving it will be difficult. Your wife's firm has resources, connections, and experience with these kinds of cases. We're going to need evidence, not just denials. What kind of evidence? Something that demonstrates Sophie's dishonesty, or your wife's affair, or preferably both. Financial records showing where your missing property went, communications between your wife and her lover, anything that contradicts their version of events. I left Linda's office with a retainer agreement and a growing understanding that the legal system wasn't designed to help people in my situation. The law favored whoever controlled the most resources and told the most convincing story. Grace had both advantages. That evening, I sat in Nick's office, researching private investigators on my laptop. Most of them looked like characters from bad television shows, overweight guys in cheap suits promising to catch cheating spouses. But one stood out. Maya Rodriguez, former FBI agent turned private investigator, specializing in financial crimes and corporate espionage. Maya's office was in a downtown high-rise, nothing like the seedy detective agencies I'd imagined. She was professional, direct, and expensive. "Your stepdaughter orchestrated this entire situation?" Maya asked, reviewing the timeline I'd prepared. "She admitted it. I heard her on the phone. But you have no recording, no witnesses, no documentation." "Correct. And you want me to prove she stole your property and lied about inappropriate conduct. I want you to find evidence of what actually happened. The truth." Maya leaned back in her chair, studying me. "Mr. Patterson, I've worked a lot of these cases. Angry husbands convinced their wives and children are conspiring against them. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're delusional. How do I know which category you're in? Because I'm not asking you to prove a conspiracy. I'm asking you to follow the evidence. If I'm wrong, the evidence will show that. If I'm right, it'll show that too." "Fair enough. My retainer is $5,000. I wrote the check, draining my personal checking account. Maya was my last hope for proving the truth through official channels. If she couldn't find evidence, I'd have to find another approach. "Where do we start?" I asked. "With the baseball cards. If your stepdaughter sold them, there's a paper trail. Pawn shops, collectible dealers, online sales, everything leaves digital footprints. If we can prove she stole and sold your property, that establishes a pattern of dishonesty that undermines her other allegations." "How long will this take?" "Few weeks, maybe a month. Depends what we find." A month felt like forever, but it was better than no plan at all. I shook hands with Maya and headed back to the gym, where Nick was teaching a boxing class to a group of teenagers from the neighborhood. "Any luck with the lawyer?" he asked during a break. "Maybe. I hired a private investigator too. Expensive approach. Cheaper than losing everything I've worked for." Nick nodded toward the teenagers practicing combinations on heavy bags. "You know what I tell these kids about fighting?" "What?" "First rule is don't fight unless you have to. Second rule is if you have to fight, fight to win. No rules, no mercy, no stopping until your opponent can't get back up." "This isn't a boxing match, Nick." "Isn't it? Your stepdaughter threw the first punch, your wife's in her corner, and they're both trying to knock you out permanently. Question is, are you going to stay on the defensive, or are you going to start throwing punches back?" That night, I lay on my cot in Nick's office, listening to the city sounds outside, traffic, sirens, the occasional shout from the street. For the first time since this nightmare started, I began thinking like an engineer again. Sophie had designed a system to destroy my life, but every system had vulnerabilities. Every design had flaws. I just needed to find them. Maya called me 6 days later with news that transformed my understanding of Sophie's operation. "Your stepdaughter's been busy," she said. "I found sales records for your baseball cards at 3 different locations: Morrison's Collectibles downtown, Pete's Pawn Shop on 5th Street, and several eBay auctions from an account registered to Sophie Patterson." "How much did she get?" "Total? About $12,000. The Mickey Mantle rookie card alone sold for $4,000, just like she told her friend on the phone. Where's the money? That's where it gets interesting. She didn't deposit it in her regular checking account. She opened a new account at First National, separate from anything connected to your family. Very sophisticated for a 19-year-old. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with rage. Finally, concrete evidence of Sophie's theft. Can we use this? Absolutely. I've got documentation of the sales, photos of the items, even security camera footage from Morrison's showing Sophie conducting the transaction. But there's more. More? I've been monitoring your wife's communications, and she's been very active with Ethan Morrison, her law partner. Lots of text messages, phone calls during work hours, dinner meetings that aren't on the firm's calendar. Morrison, the same last name as the collectibles dealer where Sophie sold my cards. Any connection between Ethan Morrison and the collectibles shop? His uncle owns it. Small world, right? The pieces were falling into place. Sophie hadn't just randomly chosen where to sell my stolen property. She'd used Grace's lover's family business, probably at his suggestion. This wasn't just teenage rebellion. It was a coordinated effort. Maya, I need you to dig deeper into Ethan Morrison. Financial records, personal history, anything that might give us leverage. That'll cost extra. Do it. 2 days later, Maya delivered a comprehensive report on Ethan Morrison that read like a prosecutor's dream. Married for 15 years to Patricia Morrison, father of 2 teenage daughters, member of the country club and several charitable boards. On the surface, a pillar of the community. Underneath, a different story. He's got serious financial problems, Maya explained. Gambling debts, bad investments, lifestyle expenses that exceed his income from the law firm. He's been borrowing against his house, maxed out credit cards, even took loans from clients' escrow accounts. That's embezzlement. Technically, yes, but he's been covering it by using money from new clients to pay back previous loans. Classic Ponzi scheme behavior, but on a small scale. How does Grace fit into this? She's been helping him hide the financial irregularities. Her signature's on several documents that reclassify escrow funds as operating expenses or case costs. She might not realize the full scope of what he's doing, but she's definitely complicit. This was better than I'd hoped. Grace wasn't just having an affair. She was potentially involved in financial crimes that could end her legal career and land both her and Ethan in prison. What about Sophie? Is she connected to any of this? Not directly, but I found something interesting. She's been in contact with Julia Santos, your wife's best friend and former law partner. Lots of phone calls and text messages over the past few months. Julia Santos. Grace had mentioned her occasionally. They'd worked together at a previous firm before Julia left to start her own practice. I'd met her a few times at firm parties, remembered her as ambitious and somewhat bitter about not making partner at Grace's current firm. What kind of contact? Can't access the content without a warrant, but the timing's suspicious. Julia and Sophie started communicating regularly about 3 months ago, right around the time Sophie began her campaign against you. You think Julia's involved in this? I think Julia Santos has reasons to dislike both you and your wife, and she's been talking to your stepdaughter during the exact period when Sophie was planning your downfall. Could be coincidence, but I don't believe in coincidences. Neither did I. Engineers are trained to look for patterns, connections, cause and effect relationships. 3 months ago, Grace made partner at her firm. Around the same time, she began her affair with Ethan. Sophie started her campaign to destroy me, and Julia Santos began regular contact with Sophie. That evening, I shared Maya's findings with Linda Chen, who reviewed the documents with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. This changes everything, she said finally. If we can prove your stepdaughter stole your property and sold it with your wife's knowledge, that undermines their entire narrative about your supposed gambling problem. What about the affair? Adultery isn't illegal, but it affects divorce proceedings. More importantly, if your wife's been helping her lover embezzle client funds, that's a felony. She could lose her law license, face criminal charges, and the connection to Julia Santos? That's the most interesting piece. If Julia's been coaching Sophie, helping orchestrate this whole situation, then we're looking at conspiracy. The question is, why Julia would want to destroy your marriage? I'd been wondering the same thing. Julia and I had barely interacted over the years. She was Grace's friend, not mine. But Maya's research had revealed something that provided a possible motive. Julia applied for a job at Grace's firm 2 years ago, I told Linda. She didn't get it. Grace was on the hiring committee. Professional jealousy? Maybe. Or maybe she blames Grace for her career problems and decided to get revenge by destroying Grace's marriage. Linda nodded slowly. It's possible. We'll need more evidence to prove it, but the pattern's there. What's our next move? We go on the offensive. File motions to freeze your wife's assets pending investigation of the embezzlement allegations. Request a full accounting of marital property, including your stolen baseball cards. Force them to respond to our accusations instead of just defending against theirs. How long will that take? Few weeks to get the motions filed and served. But Dave, once we start this process, there's no going back. You're essentially declaring war on your wife, her lover, your stepdaughter, and potentially Julia Santos. Are you prepared for that kind of fight? I thought about the past 2 weeks, sleeping on a cot in Nick's gym, watching my reputation get destroyed by lies, seeing 22 years of marriage dissolve because of a teenager's manipulation. I thought about Grace's cold dismissal, Sophie's smug performance, Ethan's smirking presence at my dinner table. I'm ready. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat in Nick's office, planning my next moves with the methodical precision I brought to engineering projects. Maya would continue investigating Julia Santos and Ethan Morrison. Linda would file the legal motions. But I needed to do something more direct, something that would shake Sophie's confidence and let her know that her perfect plan had flaws. I decided to pay a visit to Morrison's Collectibles. The shop was exactly what I'd expected. Cramped, cluttered, smelling of old paper and dust. Behind the counter sat a heavy-set man in his 60s, probably Pete Morrison, Ethan's uncle. Help you with something? I'm looking for information about some baseball cards that were sold here recently. 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle rookie card, some other vintage pieces. His expression shifted slightly. You a collector? I'm the original owner. The cards were stolen from my house and sold here without my permission. Pete Morrison's face went pale. Look, mister, I run a legitimate business. I don't knowingly buy stolen merchandise. I'm not accusing you of anything, but I need to know who sold you my cards. Can't give out customer information, company policy. I placed a photo of Sophie on the counter, one of her high school graduation pictures. This girl, about 3 weeks ago, she would have had several valuable cards, probably seemed nervous or in a hurry. Pete stared at the photo for a long moment. Yeah, I remember her. Sweet kid. Said the cards belonged to her stepfather and he'd asked her to sell them. She had ID, seemed legitimate. She lied. Those cards were stolen from my collection. You got proof of ownership? Original purchase receipts? Insurance documentation? I did, actually. 22 years of collecting had taught me to document everything. I showed Pete my insurance inventory, complete with photos and serial numbers where applicable. Well, damn, he said. This is a mess. I already sold most of these to other collectors. I'm not asking you to make this right financially. I just want you to know that your nephew's girlfriend's daughter is a thief, and she used your shop to fence stolen property. My nephew? Ethan Morrison. He's having an affair with the girl's mother. I'm guessing he suggested she bring the stolen cards here. Pete Morrison looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Ethan's married. He's got kids. He's also got gambling debts and a girlfriend. Check with him if you don't believe me. I left the shop feeling satisfied for the first time in weeks. Pete Morrison would definitely be having a conversation with his nephew, and that conversation would create exactly the kind of pressure I needed to apply to Ethan's carefully constructed double life. But as I walked back to my truck, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Sophie's red Honda Civic, the one she'd bought with money from my stolen baseball cards. She was sitting behind the wheel, talking on her phone, watching Morrison's collectibles. She'd been following me. Sophie rolled down her window as I approached her car, that same sweet smile she'd been perfecting for 19 years. "Hi, Dad. Fancy meeting you here." "Following me, Sophie?" "Just happened to be in the neighborhood. Mom asked me to keep an eye on you, make sure you're not doing anything self-destructive." She glanced toward Morrison's collectibles. "Like harassing local business owners with crazy stories about stolen property." "Not stories. Facts. Your facts, maybe. But who's going to believe the word of a suspended employee with gambling problems against a college student with no criminal record?" She was right, and we both knew it. In any he-said-she-said situation, Sophie held all the advantages: youth, innocence, victim status. I was the older man with documented behavioral problems and financial irregularities. "What do you want, Sophie?" "I want you to stop making trouble for Mom. She's been through enough stress lately, and your paranoid accusations aren't helping anyone." "Including Ethan Morrison?" Sophie's smile flickered slightly. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do. Your mom's lover, the guy whose uncle owns the shop where you sold my stolen baseball cards. Small world, isn't it?" "You're delusional." "Am I? Then you won't mind if I share my delusions with your college administration. I'm sure they'd be interested to hear about your creative financing methods." For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear in Sophie's eyes. Her college reputation mattered to her. It was part of her carefully constructed image as the innocent victim of a disturbed stepfather. "You wouldn't. Try me." Sophie stared at me for a long moment, probably calculating odds and consequences. Then her expression hardened into something I'd never seen before: pure malice. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she said quietly. "Mom isn't the only one who wants you gone. There are people who've been planning this for a lot longer than you think." "What people?" "People who remember things you've forgotten. People who have very good reasons to want your life destroyed." She rolled up her window and drove away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with more questions than answers. Sophie's final comment suggested a conspiracy that went beyond teenage rebellion, or even her mother's affair. Someone else was involved, someone with a personal grudge against me. I called Maya from my truck. "I need you to expand your investigation of Julia Santos. Go back further, 5 years, 10 years if necessary. Look for any connection between her and me, any reason she might want revenge." "What kind of connection?" "I don't know. Employment, business dealings, anything that might explain why she'd want to destroy my marriage." "This is getting expensive, Dave." "I'll find the money." That evening, Nick found me in his office, surrounded by financial documents and legal papers, trying to piece together a timeline of events. "You look like a man obsessed," he said. "I'm a man who's been set up, and I'm trying to figure out by whom. Your stepdaughter, your wife, her lover, seems pretty clear. There's someone else involved, someone who's been planning this longer than Sophie's been scheming, someone with a personal reason to want me destroyed." Nick sat down across from me, studying my face. "Dave, you sure you're not seeing conspiracies where there's just ordinary human nastiness?" "Sophie told me there are people who remember things I've forgotten, people with good reasons to want my life destroyed. That's not ordinary nastiness, that's organized revenge." "What could you have done that would justify this kind of elaborate setup?" That was the question I'd been asking myself all day. I'd lived a fairly ordinary life: work, marriage, raising Sophie, paying bills, collecting baseball cards. I wasn't a saint, but I wasn't a villain either. What could I have done that would inspire someone to orchestrate such a comprehensive destruction of my life? Maya called the next morning with information that began to answer that question. I found the connection between you and Julia Santos, she said. Morrison Industries, 8 years ago. You were part of a hiring committee that rejected her application for a senior engineering position. I don't remember that. She was one of 12 applicants for 2 positions. According to company records, she made it to the final round but was ultimately rejected in favor of 2 other candidates. That happens. We hire the best qualified candidates. Except Julia Santos wasn't just any applicant. She was a single mother, recently divorced, desperately needing that job to support her kids. When she didn't get it, she had to take a lower-paying position at a smaller firm. Her career never recovered. The memory came back slowly. 8 years ago, Morrison Industries had been expanding, adding senior positions in multiple departments. As a department head, I'd served on several hiring committees. I remembered Julia Santos now, impressive credentials, good interview, but not quite as strong as the candidates we'd selected. Maya, we made hiring decisions based on qualifications, not personal circumstances. That's how it works in the corporate world. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. I'm saying Julia Santos might see it differently, especially since one of the candidates you hired instead of her was fired 6 months later for incompetence. That's not my fault. No, but it might explain why Julia Santos has been carrying a grudge against you for 8 years, and why she'd be willing to help your stepdaughter destroy your marriage. You think she's been planning this for 8 years? I think she's been waiting 8 years for an opportunity, and your stepdaughter provided it. Julia's a lawyer. She knows how to plan, how to build a case, how to destroy someone's reputation systematically. This changed everything. Sophie wasn't the mastermind behind my destruction. She was just the weapon. Julia Santos was the architect, the one who'd been planning and waiting and looking for the perfect opportunity to get revenge for a hiring decision I'd made 8 years ago. Maya, I need everything you can find on Julia Santos. Financial records, client lists, personal history, everything. And I need it fast. What are you planning? I'm planning to have a conversation with the real person behind this conspiracy. That afternoon, I drove to Julia Santos's law office, a small suite in a converted Victorian house near downtown. Her receptionist, a young woman who looked barely out of high school, seemed nervous when I introduced myself. Ms. Santos is in court this afternoon, she said. Do you have an appointment? No, but I think she'll want to see me. Tell her Dave Patterson is here to discuss Sophie Patterson and some mutual friends. The receptionist made a phone call, spoke quietly for a moment, then hung up with a puzzled expression. She'll be right over. Julia Santos arrived 20 minutes later, and I barely recognized her. 8 years ago, she'd been a polished professional, confident, and articulate. The woman who walked into her office looked worn down by life. Tired eyes, cheap clothes, the demeanor of someone who'd been fighting uphill battles for too long. Mr. Patterson, this is unexpected. I'm sure it is. We need to talk about Sophie. Your stepdaughter? I barely know her. That's interesting, because my private investigator found records of dozens of phone calls between you two over the past 3 months, right around the time Sophie began her campaign to destroy my marriage. Julia's composure cracked slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. You've been coaching her, helping her plan this whole operation. The question is why a successful attorney would want to destroy the life of someone she barely knows. I think you should leave. Morrison Industries, 8 years ago, senior engineering position. You didn't get the job, and you've been carrying a grudge ever since. Julia sat down heavily behind her desk, suddenly looking older than her years. You have no idea what that job meant to me. Enlighten me. I was a single mother with 2 kids, and a mortgage I could barely afford. My ex-husband had stopped paying child support. I was drowning in debt, and that job was my lifeline. I was qualified, more qualified than the candidates you hired. We hired the best applicants. You hired your friends, 2 men from the old boys network, one of whom was fired within 6 months for incompetence. Meanwhile, I had to take a job paying $20,000 less per year, lost my house, had to move my kids to a different school district. That's unfortunate, but it's not my fault. Julia laughed bitterly. Not your fault? You were the committee chairman. You made the final decision. And when I called to ask for feedback, you told me I should consider looking for opportunities more suited to my situation. I didn't remember saying that, but it sounded like something I might have said. Corporate speak meant to be diplomatic, but probably coming across as condescending. Julia, I'm sorry if my words hurt you, but that doesn't justify what you've done to my family. Your family? She stood up, anger flashing in her eyes. You mean your wife who's been having an affair for months? Your stepdaughter who's been stealing from you and lying about it? That family? You orchestrated this whole thing. I just provided some guidance to a young woman who was tired of living with a man she didn't respect. Sophie came to me through Grace. They were looking for legal advice about emancipation. When I heard the situation, I suggested there might be better approaches. Like framing me for inappropriate conduct? Like documenting your actual behavior and letting the legal system work? What actual behavior? Julia smiled coldly. The drinking, the mood swings, the inappropriate comments about Sophie's appearance, the financial irregularities, all real, all documented, all lies. Are they? Or are you just a middle-aged man who lost his way and refuses to accept responsibility? I stared at her across the desk, realizing that Julia Santos genuinely believed her own version of events. 8 years of resentment had twisted her perception until she saw me as the villain in every story. This ends now, I said. No, Mr. Patterson. This ends when you accept the consequences of your actions, all of them, going back 8 years. I left Julia's office understanding that legal approaches and private investigators wouldn't be enough. Julia Santos, Sophie, Grace, and Ethan Morrison had constructed a narrative that painted me as the problem, and they had the resources and credibility to make that narrative stick. If I wanted justice, I'd have to create it myself. That night, I sat in Nick's office with Maya's complete investigation files spread across the desk like battle plans. 3 weeks of professional detective work had given me a comprehensive understanding of the conspiracy against me, but understanding wasn't enough. I needed leverage. You're planning something stupid, Nick said, watching me organize documents. I'm planning something necessary. What's the difference? Stupid would be confronting them directly, letting emotion drive my decisions. Necessary is using their own tactics against them, systematically, methodically, with the same attention to detail they used to destroy me. Nick picked up one of Maya's surveillance photos showing Grace and Ethan having dinner at an expensive restaurant. What exactly are you thinking? I'm thinking that people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Grace and Ethan have been very careful to hide their affair, their financial crimes, their involvement in Sophie's schemes, but careful isn't the same as perfect. Dave, if you're planning to blackmail them, not blackmail, justice, there's a difference. I'd spent the day studying Maya's evidence files, looking for patterns and vulnerabilities. Grace and Ethan had made mistakes, small ones but enough to work with. Julia Santos had been sloppy in her communications with Sophie. Sophie herself had left digital footprints everywhere. Most importantly, none of them expected me to fight back. They'd constructed their narrative around the assumption that I was weak, broken, defeated. That assumption was about to become their biggest mistake. The next morning, I began my counterattack. First stop, Patricia Morrison, Ethan's wife. She lived in an upscale suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where appearances mattered more than reality. Her house was a monument to upper-middle-class success, manicured lawn, luxury cars, professional landscaping. Patricia answered the door wearing tennis clothes, probably heading to the country club for her morning match. She was attractive in the way that money makes possible. Perfect hair, expensive clothes, the confident bearing of someone who'd never had to worry about mortgage payments. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Dave Patterson. I think we need to talk about your husband." Her expression shifted from polite curiosity to guarded concern. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "Not yet, but we have something in common. We're both being betrayed by people we trusted." I handed her a manila envelope containing Maya's surveillance photos, Ethan and Grace at restaurants, entering hotels, kissing in parking lots. Patricia's face went pale as she flipped through the images. "Where did you get these?" "Professional investigator. Your husband's been having an affair with my wife for the past 6 months." Patricia stared at the photos, her hands shaking slightly. "Who are you?" "I'm the man whose life your husband helped destroy. My wife filed for separation 3 weeks ago, claiming I was inappropriate with my stepdaughter and had gambling problems. All lies, designed to hide her affair with Ethan." "I don't understand." "Your husband's in serious financial trouble. Gambling debts, bad investments, embezzlement from client accounts. My wife's been helping him hide the irregularities. When I started getting suspicious, they decided to eliminate me as a problem." Patricia sank into a chair on her front porch, still staring at the photos. "Ethan said he was working late, meeting with clients. He was meeting with my wife, planning my destruction while sleeping in my bed." "What do you want from me?" "I want you to know the truth. What you do with that information is up to you." I left Patricia Morrison sitting on her porch, holding evidence of her husband's betrayal. She was a proud woman with social standing to protect. She wouldn't ignore this information. Next stop, Sophie's college. The administration building was typical academic architecture: ivy-covered brick, tall windows, an atmosphere of scholarly respectability. I met with Dean Margaret Foster, who oversaw student conduct issues. "Mr. Patterson, your stepdaughter's academic advisor mentioned you had concerns about Sophie's behavior. I have evidence that she's been financing her education through theft." I showed Dean Foster the documentation Maya had compiled: sales records, bank deposits, security camera footage. "These are my stolen baseball cards, sold without permission to fund Sophie's lifestyle." Dean Foster reviewed the documents carefully. "This is quite serious. Have you filed criminal charges?" "Not yet. I wanted to give the college an opportunity to address this internally first." "I appreciate that. We take academic integrity very seriously here. If a student is involved in theft, that's grounds for disciplinary action up to and including expulsion." "There's more." I showed her printouts of Sophie's social media posts, bragging about manipulating her parents, laughing about her stepfather's gullibility. "She's been documenting her deception online." "My goodness, she actually posted about lying to her parents?" "She thinks it's funny. She also thinks no one in authority will ever see these posts." Dean Foster made notes as she reviewed the evidence. "Mr. Patterson, I'll need to investigate this thoroughly, but based on what you've shown me, Sophie may be facing serious consequences. I just want the truth to come out." My third stop was the most important: the State Bar Association. Grace's law license was her most valuable asset, and it was vulnerable if she'd been involved in financial irregularities with client funds. The Bar Association's ethics office occupied several floors of a downtown office building. I met with investigator Robert Chen, a serious man in his 50s who specialized in attorney misconduct cases. "You're alleging that attorney Grace Patterson has been involved in embezzlement?" "I'm alleging that she's been helping her lover hide the misappropriation of client funds." I showed him Maya's financial analysis of Ethan's law practice. These documents show a pattern of borrowing from escrow accounts, with Grace's signature on the authorization forms. Chen studied the paperwork carefully. "This is concerning. Attorneys have a fiduciary responsibility to protect client funds. Any misuse is grounds for disciplinary action. There's also the matter of her filing false accusations against me to hide her affair and her involvement in these financial irregularities." "False accusations?" I showed him the evidence of Sophie's theft: the timeline of Grace's affair, the coordination between Julia Santos and Sophie. My wife filed for separation, claiming I was inappropriate with my stepdaughter and had gambling problems. All lies designed to discredit me before I could expose her affair and potential criminal activity. Chen took notes as he reviewed the evidence. Mr. Patterson, if these allegations prove accurate, Attorney Patterson could be facing suspension or disbarment. I just want a fair investigation. By the end of the day, I'd planted 3 bombs under the carefully constructed lives of my enemies. Patricia Morrison would confront her husband about his affair. Sophie's college would investigate her theft and academic dishonesty. The state bar would examine Grace's potential ethics violations. But I wasn't finished. That evening, I prepared the final phase of my counterattack. Maya had identified the key vulnerability in their conspiracy. They'd all assumed I was too weak or too stupid to fight back. They'd gotten careless, left evidence, made mistakes. Now it was time to exploit those mistakes. I started by creating a comprehensive website documenting everything: Sophie's theft, Grace's affair, Ethan's embezzlement, Julia's orchestration of the conspiracy, photos, documents, timeline, evidence. I called it The Truth About the Patterson Family Destruction. Then I began sharing the link: Sophie's college friends, Grace's professional contacts, Ethan's clients, Julia's legal colleagues. Social media made it easy to reach hundreds of people within hours. By midnight, my phone was ringing constantly. Grace, hysterical with rage. Sophie, crying and threatening. Ethan, trying to negotiate. Julia, promising legal action. I didn't answer any of the calls. Instead, I sat in Nick's office, watching my enemies' carefully constructed lives begin to collapse under the weight of their own lies. For 3 weeks, they'd controlled the narrative, painted me as the villain, destroyed my reputation with systematic precision. Now it was their turn to experience what it felt like to have your life dismantled by someone who understood exactly how to apply pressure where it would hurt most. The war wasn't over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I was winning. Tomorrow would bring the final battle. The next morning brought chaos. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and curious neighbors who'd seen my website. Grace's law firm had issued a statement distancing themselves from any potential misconduct. Sophie's college had suspended her pending investigation. Patricia Morrison had filed for divorce and frozen all marital assets. But the most satisfying call came from Ed Morrison, my former boss. "Dave, I've been reviewing the anonymous complaint that got you suspended. In light of recent developments, I think we need to discuss your reinstatement." Recent developments? Your wife's affair? Your stepdaughter's theft? The evidence of a coordinated campaign to discredit you? It's pretty clear that anonymous complaint was part of a larger scheme. What are you saying? I'm saying you've been vindicated. We'd like you to come back to work. I hung up feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Not just for revenge, but for actual justice. The truth was finally coming out, and the people who'd tried to destroy me were facing consequences for their actions. But as I prepared to leave Nick's gym for what might be the last time, I realized that winning this war had cost me something important. I'd become someone I didn't recognize, calculating, ruthless, willing to destroy lives to protect my own. The question was whether that transformation was temporary or permanent. I guess I'd find out soon enough. Soon.